Haide Filoi. I'm Fletcher from amindforlanguage.com, and you're listening to Greeking Out, a podcast for ancient and Koine Greek learners full of tools, tips, and possibly tirades on learning Greek using comprehension-based methods. If that isn't familiar to you, check out episode 0, The Manifesto, for more info. In this episode, I'm talking with Sawyer Moranville of Lingua Deo Gloria, which is a nonprofit dedicating to providing biblical language instruction at no cost. They're primarily focused on Hebrew at the moment, but Sawyer, like many biblical language students, has studied Greek as well, and so we talk about his journey into learning Greek and also what they've done and how their mission of the nonprofit. But besides just primarily teaching Hebrew classes, again, at the moment, they're actually looking for a Greek teacher, but they've produced some really cool resources, both in Hebrew and Greek. Some dictionaries, picture dictionaries for kids and readers, sort of in the Orberg style for the various books of the New Testament. So please get your earbuds, join in, listen to this really interesting conversation about a project to provide instruction in Hebrew and hopefully, going forward, Greek. Well, hi Sawyer. Thanks for coming on the podcast. I'm really excited to hear about your journey and what you're up to with Lingua Deo Gloria. So thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Fletcher. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Yeah, I think I first ran across you and what you're doing on Twitter. Just kind of like popped up, or maybe it was somebody like Seamus McDonald or somebody else that I follow. Like, I think it was actually your Jonah. Maybe it was the Jonah reader you did for Hebrew that like somebody mentioned, and I was like, hey, that's cool. So then I think I started following you, and then I think we talked a couple of weeks ago, and
Yeah, absolutely. That was last year sometime. I started dabbling in some book production and other things like that, and I was trying to figure out. I've personally been inspired. I learned Latin through Hans Orberg's book.
Okay. Yep.
Il Romana, and that was an incredible book. I mean, I loved it so much, and for me, I was trying to imitate that method, that style, implementing pictures and visual material into ancient language learning, so that the students, and myself included, can learn with more joy. And I don't know, it's a little bit of a challenge. I've been dabbling in that more and more, and I'm assuming you've seen some of the other works that we've produced as well. Yeah. It's been a lot of fun, and I've heard from so many people all over the globe that they love the materials that we're giving out, and they think they're really enjoyable, very beneficial to them. So it's actually turned out. It started as a hobby, and now it's kind of turning into a job. So so that's great.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to come back to Lingua Deo Gloria a little bit later in the interview. But so how did you get into biblical languages, specifically Greek? It sounds like you mentioned Orberg. So I guess of the Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, which one came first for you, and how did you sort of get bit by the bug?
Yeah, get the infection. I started when I was in seminary, my first semester of seminary. To get an MDiv, I went to a place in Kentucky called Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. It's required to get an MDiv, you have to take Greek and Hebrew. I think it's only like now maybe one language, 2 classes, another one course. I'm not totally sure, but I started out with Greek out of necessity. I've never been a huge language guy. I studied Spanish also out of necessity in high school. I did okay. I did pretty good, but I didn't really put in time and effort because I was a lazy bum in high school and didn't care about education, which I regret. I wish I knew Spanish now, but you can't change your past. However, when I went to seminary, you have to, like I said, you have to take a language, 2 languages. So I started out with Greek because it seemed to be the easier language, the one closer to English. And It was tough. I mean, I spent many hours each day. The teacher or it wasn't even a professor. It was like a grad assistant or something, some PhD student. The main class with the big popular teacher was full, so I took a class with a grad assistant. He was really great. Did wonderful work. It was a small class. But he's like, you should spend 1 hour a day probably studying Greek. And when I started studying, I'm like, there's no way I can only spend 1 hour a day to keep up with all the homework. This is insane. I spent probably 3 hours a day studying Greek just to make sure I could get it out of the first semester and not die. And so that was really, really tough. But I used to do sports. I used to run track and other things. And so I always have been comfortable with brutalizing myself, working really, really, really hard at something just to get it done. And even in sports that I didn't like, I didn't really quit them. I just kept working hard at it. And look, I got through the first semester, got into second semester, and took a great class. We started translating First John. It was a wonderful experience. It was still tough, of course. But then I was like, you know what? Look, I got through 2 semesters. I could stop here. But I'm like, you know what? I kind of want to take a Romans exegesis class. And so I took Romans exegesis with a professor named Thomas Schreiner, a really wonderful guy. Great professor, godly man, wonderful pastor. And from there, I was hooked. I mean, I took that class and I was like, I love this and I'm never stopping this. I don't know what happened, but I didn't convince myself to start loving languages. It just kind of happened. I just started learning, and I was like, I'm not going to stop this. I don't care what happens. I'm just going to keep going with Greek. And then Hebrew is also mandatory. So I started taking a little bit of Hebrew, probably the worst idea of my life. I took a 6-week intensive summer Hebrew.
Oh, man.
And most of the students were their final semester in seminary or something, I'm pretty sure. And they're like, hey, I'm just getting out of this. I don't care if I get a C. They're like, C's get degrees. Let's just get this class out of the way. I already graduated. I already, whatever. I just need to do this final class because some schools let you take a class after you graduate. And so a bunch of the students in there were like that. And I still worked really hard. I mean, I spent hours and hours a day, but I was like, this is just impossible, man. It was a really tough experience for me. And so what happened from there is I was like, I need to take a break. And but my grandmother was a Latin teacher years and years ago, and she studied Latin, I mean, maybe 60 years ago. And then after she retired, she retaught herself Latin to teach a local Christian high school in Montana where I used to live. And so I asked my grandma, I was like, what do you think about Latin? And I started studying Latin, and I didn't know much about Latin or Greek at the time, but I was like, I heard there's connections between Latin and Greek, whether grammar or the history of the language or other things. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll just study some Latin. My grandma thinks it's a great language. It would help me even improve my English vocabulary. And I started taking Latin, and the professor named Tyler Flatt, amazing guy. He taught through a book called Familia Romana, Lingua Latina per se illustrata by Hans Orberg, who's now deceased, but he wrote an incredible book, a masterful book, probably my favorite language book ever produced. I've searched modern and ancient language books, without end, and I love that book. I learned a lot. And my professor actually used communicative methodology in Latin. And so we were speaking, listening, writing, reading, acting in class. We were doing all of these fun games and exercises. And I was like, I had a moment of reflection, or maybe many days of reflection, many months of reflection while I was taking those courses. And I was asking the question, why is it that I love Latin more than any of my other language classes? I'm learning Latin probably twice as fast as any of my other classes, and I'm enjoying them more, and the language is being retained in my memory for a longer period of time. and one could say, well, it's Latin. It has an alphabet very similar to English. We have a very similar common vocabulary. But then it also made me think about methodology because
Hmm.
I actually got excited to go to Latin class every day. I was so jacked. I was like, let's do Latin. I want to keep going. I don't want to stop after an hour. I don't want to stop after 2 hours. I want to keep studying Latin. And so it made me begin to think about methodology in language learning. And so I went down the rabbit hole. The internet's a wonderful place and also a dangerous place. And I just started researching methodologies and language learning, and started comparing the methodology that I had with Greek and Hebrew with Latin. And honestly, though, I'm not really big into second language acquisition studies. I'm glad other people do that, but that's not really what convinced me to do a communicative language methodology in that sense. It was more just the experience of joy. It was just the great joy that I experienced in my Latin class. I was like, I want to do this with Greek and Hebrew as well. And so that's when I started researching online people who do that same thing. And I found a couple people in Israel, obviously the Polis Institute, an amazing organization, school over there in Jerusalem, and then the something called the Institute for Biblical Languages and Translation that also did, communicative biblical Hebrew for Bible translation purposes and other things. So that's a little longer maybe than you expected, but that's kind of my entryway into ancient language loving. And so yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed it. So I went from Greek to Hebrew to Latin to Aramaic, and now I'm studying some Syriac,
Oh, nice.
a dialect of Aramaic, which is a lot of fun. Very similar to biblical Aramaic on a number of levels, and even some similarities to modern Hebrew and ancient Hebrew. And so it's kind of cool to be able to enjoy that language. And the script is just beautiful. So
Yes, it is.
so what started out as a necessity in seminary has turned out literally to be a lifelong love and obsession for languages. And so that's kind of where I'm at now.
So I think there's a couple of interesting points to just highlight listening to your story. One of them you said is like the grit you had developed from sports, from running. I mean, I'm a very lazy runner myself, but I get the idea. It's like you get out there and it's like, well, I'm 4 miles from home and I can either walk this and it take an hour, or I can keep running and I'll get there a little bit faster, despite the fact that my feet and legs hurt and my, muscles are burning. But like you just learn to keep pushing. And it's like, hopefully we can find, better methodologies like like you're using, and have used for Greek and Latin that aren't just slog through it, but having that grit and ability to say, okay, well, I've just got to put in the time today, because even with great methods, if you're not consistent, your results are not going to be anywhere near as good.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree.
And so I'm assuming that like your seminary class was probably a more grammar translation for Greek and Hebrew, memorize these rules in this vocab and now go translate. And then and you said like that just took a ton of work, but then you felt this experience of joy in the Latin class where it was communication based, right? Is that a fair restatement of what you said?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that I did find joy in the normal classes, the quote unquote grammar translation classes. I found great joy in that. It just felt a little more difficult and it was more time consuming. But yeah, so I found joy in both methods. That's why I kept going in the first place with Greek. And so it's not as if I do still think there's serious benefit to translating. And that's what, most people in the world need a Bible, so we need to translate. So I'm on board with translation. I'm not opposed to that methodology. I just personally, maybe you can call me a hedonist in one sense. I want to do the language learning methodology that's the most fun, the most enjoyable.
Yeah.
I think that's just what humans want generally. They want something that's academically rigorous, but also seriously joyful, joy-filling, right? And so that's kind of where I just followed my desires, really.
Well, I think, to maybe use an analogy, it's much easier to walk up a mountain when it's a beautiful mountain rather than just to slog up something that's, fire and brimstone, like.
Yeah. No, I totally
Um,
get it. It's more pleasant to walk in a forest in Montana for me, with beautiful massive trees, and shade rather than in the middle of a 120-degree desert. So,
well, or you could, I mean, I live in Virginia, and you try to walk through a forest here, and like unless there's a trail, it's full of briars and brambles,
oh
and
yeah,
it's going to cut you to ribbons, and there's going to be ticks and mosquitoes, and so
yeah,
yeah,
totally.
it's yeah, no, and that makes sense. I've heard that same story over and over again in people that I've interviewed here of, grammar translation, lots of work, and then, communicative methods being more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Um,
Can
so
I
you,
actually say one thing to that point too?
yeah,
And it's not as if what people call the direct method, communicative methodology, spoken ancient language, whatever you want to call it, it's not as if that doesn't involve a ton and a ton of work. That's just learning any language will always involve tons and tons and tons of work. But the reason why massive farms don't use a plow or oxen and all of those things, they use a John Deere tractor nowadays, is because of efficiency and effectiveness in farming and harvesting and other things. And so I do think that God has created the world in such a way that there's more effective and less effective, more efficient and less efficient methods. No matter what, no matter who you are, I don't care if you're a super genius and have a memory, a photographic memory, or you're somebody who never has studied languages, has a terrible memory. It's going to take a lot of time for either party. And so, and I think that anybody getting into language learning should just get in for the long haul and be like, this is a long-term thing, whether it's through a communicative method or a traditional grammar translation method. So either way, I just wanted to say that as a side point.
well, and I totally agree with you. Like, again, I mention it all the time. I really like the four-strand approach that Paul Nation takes because it's like, there is one of those strands is explicit grammar, like explicit language learning. So studying grammar, studying vocabulary, but then there's input, output, and then there's just review, fluency development, just that you're reviewing and constant going over stuff that's actually relatively easy
Mhm.
just to cement it. And I think the main trouble with grammar translation is that that approach that's usually used in seminaries and often in universities is it puts all the eggs on the explicit study and there's nothing for or very little for fluency development or comprehensible input or output. And then you hit those classes like your Latin class that you mentioned and they start actually putting the other three strands in there and you're like, this is much easier and much more enjoyable because you get that aha moment of communicating in a new language, which is just a lot of fun. Um, but I like how that says like, hey, you got to learn vocab. I mean, like, there's not really two ways around it. And you learn vocab through massive amounts of repetition. That just kind of seems to be the only way it happens, regardless of the method you're using. But like you said, some are a whole lot more efficient than others and more enjoyable. So yeah,
Mm, absolutely.
let's look for the more enjoyable things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, Okay, so that's kind of how you got into this stuff. So where did the hobby of that eventually became Lingua Deo Gloria, where did that begin? You said you started with some readers about a year or two ago. What got that
Yeah,
kicked
I
off?
guess it was just last year. So what was going on? Um, my wife and I laugh about this now. We got back from Israel. My wife and I lived in Jerusalem for 14 months. I got a master's degree. After I finished my master's of divinity in Kentucky, we moved over to Jerusalem to get a master's in classical Hebrew. And I got it through, as I mentioned earlier, the Institute for Biblical Languages and Translation, which is now called the Whole Word Institute. And they have an intensive, immersive biblical Hebrew program, which is top notch, incredible, amazing people over there. Really, really wonderful program. But what happened was I got back to the States and I was antsy and I was restless and I was like, I want to go back to Israel and learn more Hebrew. I want to keep being immersed in the language. I love it so much. Because I when I left Israel, I was able to read most of the Hebrew Bible very, very easily. I could just pick it up in the morning and open it up and not worry about translating, looking up words. I just read most of the narratives and it's just delightful. But I'm one of those people who just wants to keep going and never wants to stop. I would have been happy if I could have stayed in Jerusalem and lived there, except for it was a little difficult emotionally for us, and also financially, it was just impossible for us to go back.
Yeah.
And so for the longest time, I was like, what can I do? I can't go back. And then we were like, maybe somehow we can go to Greece and I can learn Greek or whatever. I was just thinking of all these plans and all this crazy stuff. And I was praying. I was like, I just can't find, in one sense, I was not content. And I should have been more content during that period. But I was like, what am I going to do? And I prayed and prayed. And I was like, man, I just do not, I want to go back to Israel, but I can't. And I don't. And so I kind of hit a brick wall over and over and over. And finally, I contacted Andrew Case at him and his wife do something called Aleph with Bet. They have a YouTube page and they teach biblical Hebrew. And I don't know why I contacted him. I wasn't really, I don't even know why personally. I was just like, hey, do you guys need help with anything? Do you guys need financial help? It's cool what you're doing. And I think I just wanted to make more connections. And so I just emailed him and we talked and so I just started, communicating with him about things. Where can we serve the church? Frankly, how can we serve Christians in all that they're doing to translate the Bible and ultimately bring the Word of God into every language across the globe? And so he was saying, maybe some of this, maybe some of that. We do need some easy Hebrew stories. We have a lot of, advanced stuff, but we don't have as much introductory, easy things. Same with Greek. There's a lot of more advanced, beautiful materials works, but the introductory level materials, they're very few and far between. And so I started thinking, and around that time, my brother-in-law was in college. He still is, but he was taking like a social or like a graphic design course and was talking to me about something called Canva. And it was like an online application where you can make some materials and whatever. And I started dabbling with it, and I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. I might be able to make some books with this or something, or at least like some flashcards, pictures, whatever. And long story short, I spent hours and hours and hours studying, trying to figure out how to make books, create stuff through that. And I started copying Hans Orberg's book. I don't know if I have it on my desk. I do have it here. Obviously, you know about this book, but
oh yeah, no, I've got a copy.
I literally opened this book and I started like copying it almost verbatim. I was like, okay, I can put a line here and a line there and some side margin notes in Hebrew and all this stuff, the main text of Jonah. And so I started doing a project on the book of Jonah and putting pictures in the pages and side margin notes and other things. And I had a lot of fun. It took me so much time, though, because obviously it was just a hobby in my spare time outside of work. But it was a great joy. And from there, I was like, you know what, maybe I'll just make a website. My wife just put together a website. She's amazing. She just put a bunch of time and effort into it. And I was like, maybe we'll just release it on our website for free. And so we ended up doing that. And I made some social media accounts. I'm not really generally one for social media, but, we started doing this, started just posting it on like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. And it was a really cool experience. There was a lot of great feedback. There were a lot of ways for me to improve. And I made so many mistakes and so many spelling errors in Hebrew, but it's nice to have the online community to help me to correct things. And from there, we started doing more projects, refining materials, making them better, making them more attractive. And recently, we started expanding to other book production applications and to make them more professional and better quality. So that's kind of what led us into this. And after a while, I started, doing more and more materials. Last summer, like I said, I was writing and producing. And in the fall, I started realizing through the encouragement and counsel of some people in my church and some friends, maybe you should start a nonprofit and you can potentially get donations to support your labors so that you could produce more things for people for free. And long story short, that's exactly what happened. So in February of this year, we became a nonprofit called Lingua Deo Gloria Ministries. And I could keep going in that. I don't want to, go into, I go into rabbit trail, so you can, put the reins on me. But we started teaching free biblical Hebrew, communicative biblical Hebrew. And we produce materials for free and we post them on our website for the church and to serve God's people. So it's a lot of fun. It's a challenge. It's time consuming, but it's a blast.
So I'm looking at your website here, and it's a cool website. Y'all clearly put some time into it. But
my wife, she's amazing, Kara. She did pretty much most of it. I can't take the credit for that. So
yeah, well, my wife is the person that keeps me from going into too many side projects and making sure I stay on track with a few things at least. So, yes, you have to have, it's great to have that support.
She's the creative one. I'm just the crazy one. She does beautiful, wonderful things. I'm just like, I just can't do stuff like that. I am very, most of my life, I don't have very practical jobs except for just knowing languages. She's amazing though. She's an artist and she does some other things like that. So
like I'm looking here, and these books are beautiful. Like you're in the beginning book for Hebrew. I'm looking at that, like the sample pages, the illustrations are like, they're really great colors. They're really like nice detail. Like they're really nice books. How do you, I'm just curious, personally, because I've been mucking around with AI and image generation and stuff. Like how do you get these images? Are you finding them somewhere? Are you creating them by hand, or is it AI? Like what's your process?
That's a great question. So one of our intentions is to produce free biblical language material without cost. And so we want to release all of our stuff for free on our website, so that there won't be a financial barrier for maybe poorer Christians. We really want people all over the globe to be able to experience and receive good materials. And so one of my thoughts was, look, this is a side hobby. I can't personally pay somebody right now to illustrate for us. And so what we ended up doing was dabbling with image generation, AI. Thankfully, last year, of course, there's the big AI boom. Everybody who didn't know about AI now knows about AI and that it can produce good images. There's a bunch of issues with some AI. You get like 10 fingers instead of 5, or you get 3 eyes sometimes, or 4 ears, whatever. But for the most part, if you are very specific, and that's what we ended up doing because we couldn't pay people, and it's a side hobby, and so we realized, well, let's just take advantage of some AI art image generation for the time being until we can start getting enough donations or revenue in our nonprofit to be able to pay people in the future. And so that's what we took advantage of, and we're not getting a profit for it anyway, so I didn't feel bad for doing that. We used an application called Canva. And so as I mentioned earlier, Canva is an amazing company out of Australia, I believe it is. And that was our book production application. I don't use it as much anymore, but it was a great start. And you can produce AI images through them. And then from Canva, ChatGPT, that big old boom came out, and they actually started producing AI generated images to a more accurate extent. You can actually have a conversation with it and say, I don't like the background. Can you change it to this background? And then it's like, yeah, of course, I'll update the background for you. And then we also use some Adobe Photoshop. Now Adobe Photoshop has some AI materials, and so we're doing a lot of things like that. Like I said, our ultimate goal is to get away from computer generated, AI generated images, but for the time being, we're fine with using good things like this to serve people. And as we mentioned, it's all for free. We're not getting a profit out of any of our books. So we personally, as a company, are fine with using AI for the time being until we can produce more good materials to serve the church and benefit Christians and other people who just want to learn Greek and Hebrew. And so that led us to produce, as you mentioned, our children's books. And we really wanted simple, beautiful, easy material for children because we don't think that biblical languages should just be for adults. We think that we should introduce them to the youngest people from a young age. And so that was our goal. I ultimately did it as a hobby just for my daughter. And then I was like, hey, it sounds like people are excited about this. I should just release it on our website to the world. And so that was a big deal. And so we published it under our ministry name, Lingua Deo Gloria Publishing. And so that came out, the Hebrew one in December. And we ended up publishing a Greek one in February. So that was, a big deal, really cool.
So, I mean, one of the things that amazes me, like when I've messed with AI generations, for images, you get a lot of variance, like this, in background and stuff and in style, I feel like, but like I look at these images and they're really consistent. Like it's the same art style, it's the same like color palette. Like that's one of the things I'm trying to figure out how to do because I'm actually tutoring Latin this fall.
Okay.
And I'm required to use Henley Latin, which is a
Yeah, I
grammar
know.
grammar translation thing, and it's like I'm dying on the inside with the SLA background I've got and stuff, and like I know I would love to come up with some readers and maybe have some illustrations in it. So I've thought, well, how can I do that?
Well, just for anybody else listening too, I encourage you, you can do Canva, you can go to ChatGPT. All of these, though, cost a little bit of money. We're a nonprofit, so Canva, you can get a free subscription, Canva Pro for nonprofits. But some of them cost money, of course. But if you can do them, I'd be very, very specific with the language, okay? And you need to have a style that you like. So I'm not a big art guy, but I had to start researching styles that I wanted. And so you can do illustrative realistic, you can do cartoon, you can do water sketch or something like that. So get very specific, say what you want generally. And so with that book, for instance, I would have a copy and paste, a general cookie cutter phrase. I want a man drinking water beside a river in ancient Israel, illustrative realistic, on a white background or something like that. Or you could say a cartoon image of X, Y, and Z on a white background or with a beautiful blue sunset behind it or other things. You have to get very specific and you have to make sure that every time you ask for a new picture, it has a very similar phrase. If you change up the phrase, then it's going to create very, very different pictures, of course. And so for those of you, and even you yourself, Fletcher, if you want to create consistent imaging or images, I would encourage you to have consistent phrases to help you with that. So
that makes sense, and I think I think about for us learning vocab, right? Like I'm fairly comfortable with Greek grammar at this point in my life, but if I open up the Iliad, I am lost within a line, like the second or third line, or Iliad or Odyssey, because the vocabulary is so different from what I'm used to in the New Testament. So like you're learning all this, learning vocab is hard, and again requires repetition and things, and so to me, as a learner, being able to say, hey, I can generate an image for this thing, like give me an ancient Greek helmet, stylized for whatever, so I can then drop that drop that into Anki with the Greek word for helmet I'm trying to learn. Like that would be really cool. And especially, also like if we're thinking about classical memory techniques where you come up with these ridiculous stories to remember a word, like if you could drop that into Chat GPT or something and then have an image that you can drop in your flashcard to help you remember, like that would be, that'd be another kind of cool way to amp up vocabulary acquisition, or at least flashcards. As a piece of vocab acquisition, I think it'd be kind of something that people might explore and then get back and say, hey, Fletcher, that's a really stupid idea. I wasted a bunch of time, or not, as the case may be.
No, I agree with you. I think that's why our books were so popular. Within the first couple weeks, our Greek book sold over 400 copies.
Wow.
And it's an ancient Greek book, and it sold 430 copies in less than a month. It was incredible. And I think that's, people want to learn vocabulary and do it in an enjoyable way with beautiful images. And so So our book is essentially like a flashcard deck,
Yeah.
just without flashcards. They're in pages, like what, six vocab words per page.
Group
Or
thematically.
yeah, exactly. And so I agree. I think that is one of the best ways to learn vocabulary in any language is using a picture as an anchor. Even some words, of course, have a one-to-one picture-to-word ratio.
Yeah.
If you put a horse on a picture and you put the word Seuss in Hebrew, you know exactly what it means. Other pictures are a little more ambiguous. You can't really figure them out. They're a little vague sometimes. It's like, is this a man drinking water or is it a man doing something else? Or he's tired and therefore he's drinking water or whatever, right? Some words and phrases aren't, you can't get a one-to-one picture. But at the end of the day, a picture will still help you retain that material because your brain thinks in images. We
Yeah.
always think in images. And if you can connect an image to a vocabulary item rather than a vocabulary item connected to a translation,
Hmm.
the picture will stick in your head. Translations hardly stick in people's heads, but pictures stick in people's heads.
Well,
And this is just that's why it's one of my favorite ways to learn vocab is whenever I find a new word in a biblical story or a biblical text, I write down that word and then I put a picture right next to it. And every time I look at that word, I don't look at English, I look at the picture. And then it's like an anchor to your brain. That text, that vocabulary item is going to be anchored in your memory because of the picture. And that's my favorite part. And so I absolutely agree, Fletcher.
well,
I think that's an amazing idea.
and thinking about like the ambiguities you mentioned, like sometimes you don't have a one-to-one thing, and like you've got a picture of a tired guy drinking water, and you want to learn the word, tired. Well, for a lot of us, you could then actually put below the picture a really simple, phrase in Greek or Hebrew. We could write it out that says, like what the man's feeling, or not. We could put a clue actually in the language about the image to know what is it from that image we're supposed to remember. And I remember I've done that at various points. You could write,
Absolutely.
emotion or color and like with these thematic sets, you could say, well, here's the thing and just put below it, subject, you know, land or whatever, and that would be
Yeah.
enough to help anchor it. But another thing, I was I'm curious what you think about this. I follow a copywriter mostly just for fun, because I write newsletters sometimes, and he was he got to talking about, he's a Christian, he says he is, and he wrote a page about, basically intro to Christianity. Like if you want, what are the books you should read to get into it? And so I was like, okay, I'm curious, what would he say? And his recommendation number one was like the Action Storybook Bible. And it's like, one of the reasons he gave is he said, because in the images, you get all the background information. Like you get a quick sense of time, place, what did it look like to walk around in ancient Jerusalem? Like you get those kinds of things that we immediately can pick up in an image. But, if you were going to read it in, say, a study Bible or go to commentaries or, search the web, you'd be reading pages and pages of stuff trying to comprehend something that an image gives you in a fraction of a second.
Yeah.
So, I'm thinking too, like I noticed I'm looking at your Greek one here, and you have eremos, and it's not a desert. You've got trees, and, it's sparse, but it's not cultivated. And like, I think that's great, because my understanding of that Greek word is it doesn't refer to a desert. It just refers to a place without inhabitants, and it's, we would say desolate or wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
We often get desert as the translation in our Greek books. And so like with this image, you can kind of communicate, especially when you've got it in, like on that page, you've got it on the same page with, agros and ule. So you can see like forest and field. So like the images it's with also help you work out the contrast between these words, which I think that's really valuable too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there was, I will say, I have a really, really knowledgeable friend who helped me with that. I actually thought it was desert, and then he corrected me. And so he's like, yeah, well, it's not necessarily desert. It's more a wilderness. It just means people don't, live there, as you were mentioning. So Joseph Neal at the Biblical Greek program Sawyer.com. He's an amazing guy. Lives up here close to me in Pennsylvania, actually. And he's also an amazing, Greek teacher, really. And he helped me a lot with that book, correcting so many of my mistakes. And so I just want to give him props publicly for that. So, but yeah, it was a good, I think it's really helpful and it's a lot of fun. Like I sit down with my daughter and she's like, book. And so we could just open those books up and now she's talking to me in Hebrew, right? It's just like anybody would do with their kids in English. Yeah, she picks the book off the shelf and she's, like I said, she's going to be 3 in November. And she's now telling me what the words are, right? And she asked me in Hebrew, Maze, what is this? Maze. And I'm like, I tell her, and then other times she already knows. And so it's a lot of fun and it's accessible to people of all ages, right?
And the cool thing about that is that conversation, correct me if I'm wrong, the amount of active Hebrew or Greek, as the case may be, you need to have that conversation with a kid is pretty minimal. It's like, what is this? This is like now you can have a meaningful exchange with a kid or even with another adult in your target language. I remember Seamus McDonald giving that advice in, I think, one of the interviews or one of the classes I had with him about just learn enough to be able to talk about a text or about something, in Greek to get going. And then you've got something to talk about, or like with pictures, you can talk about that and you can have these conversations and then it's engaging and fun. And, and again, you can start young kids on this journey too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really cool. So you've got some great resources. You've clearly learned a lot about how to produce them. And another interesting thing I noticed too is you mentioned that review process from releasing and getting feedback and then having friends who can help. I think that's really valuable with producing stuff. But so, as we wrap up here, how can people get in touch with you? If they're interested in classes or they want to, support your work or help out, where can we find you?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're on Twitter, X, I guess I should call it, Facebook, Instagram, and also our email, linguadeogloria@gmail.com. There's a number of things that you can find most of the things on our website. Like anything that we produce or anything that we've given to the public, you can download for free on our website. So any of the Jonah, Ruth, so Greek and Hebrew materials, essentially, booklets or other, even the children's books, as you've just mentioned. I've had people from Lebanon, from Pakistan, from India, from China, all over the world have contacted us saying, thank you so much for this. We've printed this off and we're teaching our kids, or I'm teaching people in my Bible studies. Or there was a pastor in Pakistan who contacted me and he said, thank you so much for releasing these to us for free. And then he sent us a video of him teaching a Bible college from our book that he printed off at home, because we released the PDF to him on our website and he on the other side of the world could download it and print it off in a printer in Pakistan and teach people. And it was amazing. It's so encouraging. And there are so many other stories like that. So please, anybody online, there's no copyright restrictions. You don't ever have to worry about us suing you. You can change our documents. You can alter them. You can publish them. That's one of the big things that I want to get out to. Anybody in the globe, if you live in China, if you live in Indonesia, if you live in Japan, if you live in Africa, you can download this, print it off, or publish it through your own publishing company and never even have to ask us about it. Why do we do that? It's because we want materials. We don't want to ever put chains on wonderful materials. We want them to be released to the globe. We don't want anybody to worry about copyright restrictions, lawsuits, etc. We want wonderful material to go to the poorest and to the richest and to anybody across the globe so that anybody can learn the biblical languages. And so that's one of our main reasons for doing so. So you can find those online. We currently only teach biblical Hebrew. I want to be able to teach Greek in the future, but right now we're developing our own Hebrew curriculum, which is very time consuming. It's very challenging. And so I don't have as much time for Greek as I would like. And so hopefully in the future, other people will be able to join us. But as of right now, we're only able to teach Hebrew, but we do that for free also. And every quarter, generally we go by university semesters, summertime, fall, winter, spring, etc., summer. And we have new classes generally every quarter. I think I'm only able to open up one new class, one new free class this fall, yeah, just because of my time. And like I said, most of this is a hobby. I don't do this and get paid a ton for this. Actually, right now, I don't get paid anything. I have 5 classes right now that I teach for free. That takes up like, with prep, it takes like 15 or 20 hours of my week up in my free time. But it's a joy. It's a joy for me. That's why I do it. I wouldn't be doing it if I hated it. It's a joy to be able to serve people all over the world. And so, yeah, if anybody wants to learn Hebrew with us in the future, you can contact us via our email, via social media, or we generally have applications that are opened up on our website under the teaching tab. So, yeah, sorry for the long-winded answer to your question, but that's how you can get a hold of us if you're interested in our materials or future classes.
So cool. So let me ask a follow-up there. So like you, it sounded like Lingua Deo Gloria kicked off because of that sort of agitation or antsy feeling of you got back from learning biblical Hebrew and wished you had something to do with it. So like maybe somebody's in that same boat with Greek right now and they're saying, hey, I really wish I had a platform, or I'd love to teach if I had an opportunity. So if someone's willing to say teach and donate their time to teach through Lingua Deo Gloria, is that a possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. We are a Christian nonprofit, so we would obviously prefer Christians teaching for us. If somebody wasn't a Christian though and wanted to teach anyways, we would be more than willing to advertise for them, tell people about them, and yeah, and so absolutely. I mean, like I said, we're definitely committed to the historic Christian faith. I mean, we're devoted to honoring God and glorifying Jesus Christ. But at the end of the day, you don't have to be a Christian to teach the ancient languages, the biblical languages. And so we absolutely would encourage. And that's a great point that we can conclude on. I was antsy, as you mentioned. And what was the thing that allowed me to no longer desire more education or going back to Israel? It was actually teaching. I didn't need more education. I already had plenty. It was being able to give freely of the education that I received. And one of our goals at Lingua Deo Gloria is for the people who can't go to Israel or go to Greece, we bring people there in one sense, right? You can learn through Zoom video calls with us, and it's a lot of joy. I mean, we find so much joy in our classes because so many people can never just uproot their lives, uproot their families, and move overseas. And that's one of the joys that we can bring to a lot of our students. And we're just so thankful for the opportunity. And yeah, I fully encourage other people, if you're willing to do something like that, please contact us. We would love to get you connected. I just had a student the other day at a seminary. He's like, I want to learn Greek with you. Please, do you have an open Greek class? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't open Greek right now. I'm devoted to this Hebrew curriculum. But if anybody else in the future would like to learn, not learn, but teach Greek, we would be overwhelmingly joyful. So please contact us if you'd like to partner or connect in any way. And yeah, thank you so much, Fletcher, for having us on today. So
yeah, and thank you, Sawyer. I appreciate it. It was a really fun conversation, and I look forward to seeing what you guys are going to come up with in the coming years. So.
Absolutely. We have ambitious plans, so we'll see what happens.
Well, very cool. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Have a good one, man. Bye.
Bye.
Intro and outro music is Funky Thanksgiving by Admiral Bob, used with gratitude under Creative Commons 3.0 Attribution License. The track can be found at dig.ccmixer.org.